Thomas Piketty, you say that an 80% tax rate over incomes of $500,000 wouldn't reduce the growth of the American economy. That's a bit of a leap of faith, isn't it?
Oh, maybe it should be above 1 million or above 2 million. But look, I'm not here to make predictions. I'm here to try to put these issues in historical perspective. So what we've had in the past, is a very diverse set of experience in terms of tax policy and inequality and growth. So for instance, in America, in the United States of America, on average, the top marginal tax rate between 1930 and 1980 was 82%. Over a 50-year-long period, sometimes it was 90, somewhere it was 70, but if you make the average over this 50-year-long period, this was 82%. Now, this applied above $1 or $2 million of annual income, typically, so very high income. And I guess this is the reason why, apparently this is not destroy American capitalism. So, and in fact, if anything, growth rate, productivity growth rate, innovation, as far as it delivers productivity growth rate, was higher before 1980 than it has been since then. So, I think we should try to have a quiet debate about these issues. 80% tax rate would be a disaster if you were to impose it on everybody above 200, above 1 or 2 million.
Above 200.
200,000 pounds or $200,000, but above 1 million or above 2 million, the historical evidence suggests that paying a manager's 10 million instead of 1 or 50 instead of 10, it's not that useful. So above a certain point, you just don't see in the data the extra managerial performance that you would like to see.
He's not talking about whacking the rich, he's just talking about whacking the super rich. What's wrong with that?
Well, there's lots of economic evidence and lots of counter-economic evidence, actually, that high marginal tax rates on high earners actually has a negative effect on growth. I know that some of your work suggests otherwise, but many other people have done work on this.
So
I'd suggest. Sorry, can I just finish this point? I'd suggest that if you look at the history of the UK, for example, we had extraordinarily high tax rates in the 1970s, up to 98% on unearned capital income. That time wasn't a sort of productive, egalitarian paradise in the UK. In fact, it was associated with the period of worst industrial relations that we've had in the 20th century.
The FT has said that some of your numbers have been constructed out of thin air.
This is wrong. I have responded to that, point by point. Look, I put all the data online. Everything can be reproduced, including the formulas, all the computer do files, and we put updated data online almost every week, on the World Top Income Database website. So, I am very happy that this book is stimulating debate. This is what it is here for. And I think in the case of the FT, I think they are wrong. I think they should not deny that inequality has been rising, and
it's not just the FT. It's not just the FT. It's the Office for National Statistics, our main statistical body. And I spoke to them last week, and they're very confident about their figures. Actually, they think their survey data is extremely reliable.
About the top
and I understand that they're doing some work.
The top part of their wealth survey data.
That's what they suggested to me.
About the top part.
That's what they suggested to me.
No, look, this is self-reported data where the top is entirely missing. You don't have anybody above 1 or 2 million pounds, and you have nobody at 100 million pounds. So of course, if you have a wealth survey where the top is excluded from the survey, so you're saying there are people with 100 million pounds in the wealth survey?
You use self-reported data for the United States.
Well, no, but this was compared with... No, but look, that's a very important point. The survey of consumer finance that's organized by the Federal Reserve in the United States, they compare the findings and they upgrade the top part on the basis of administrative tax data on large inheritance and on the basis of rankings of large fortunes made by magazine. As far as I know, the ONS
this is extremely important. This is extremely
that.
important, though, because if the ONS is right, and if you look back at some of the other historical sources, it actually suggests that wealth inequality may have gone up a bit in the UK over the past 40 years, but it's not this huge sort of extrapolation
look,
that actually
why is it so hard?
I agree.
Why is it so hard to measure the wealth of the very rich? Why is that so difficult to do?
Well, because they tend to hide. They don't want to report it to a survey. But let me say that I agree with what you just said, which is that there's been only a limited rise in wealth inequality across Europe, and that it's only in the United States that the rise in wealth concentration has been really large.
We can argue about the extent of wealth inequality, but you'd admit, would you, that it matters?
it depends actually. And actually, I think one of the weaknesses of Thomas's book, which I think is a very interesting contribution to the debate, is that bar sort of saying, oh, there's democratic implications, didn't really spell out why wealth inequality was necessarily a bad thing. And I actually think this is all a bit of a sideshow. If you look back at the history of the past 200 years, since we've sort of rolled out capitalist systems across the world, we've seen the most extraordinary improvement in the absolute living standards of people all across the world. And we're seeing this in China and India at the moment, and global inequality, if you take that measure, is actually falling. So I think we can get wrapped up in this very static look at the distribution of wealth or the distribution of income at any one time.
But wealth inequality feels pretty rough if you're at the bottom of the pile, doesn't it?
But that's poverty. You know, poverty feels very rough. I don't think inequality feels very rough per se. I mean, what's the causal mechanism by which inequality per se leads to poorer living standards? I mean, that's poverty. That's not inequality. Look, I think most people in the UK think that when they've earned their income and earned wealth, it should be theirs. I think if you look at the inheritance tax, for example, 70% of people in the UK think the inheritance tax is wrong on principle, and that's why
most people wouldn't vote for taxes.
That's why Margaret Thatcher was so
You've got a book on
successful,
capitalism, storming up the bestsellers charts, suggests a fundamental crisis in capitalism. Can it survive?
Well, I think it can survive because I think it's the only show in town. Look, the book was really split into three parts as far as I can see. First, it was a very useful contribution on the history of inequality of income and wealth, which I think is fantastic work. The second part was on a sort of forecast of what would happen, based on certain assumptions, which, some of them are more questionable than others, assumptions about growth, assumptions about how much the wealthy save, about transmission of inheritances. And the third was the policy recommendations. I actually think when this debate's all over, the second two won't be remembered as much as the contribution of the first.
You were in Parliament yesterday. I think you saw Ed Miliband among other people. Is he the man to translate your ideas into action, do you think?
Look, I'm not going to take position, on the UK
He's taken a position on you, though.
Debate. Yeah, again, I think these issues are beyond left and right. We talk a lot with Ed Miliband about this mentioned tax issue. And, as I told you before, to some extent, this is a joint Labour and Conservative product. And I think both parties should be concerned about making it work in a more efficient manner. And again,
Did you meet the Tories yesterday?
Annual property tax. I don't think they invited me, but I'm a very polite person, and I usually respond to invitation.
But Ed Miliband's impressed you, has he?
Most of the time. Yeah, I think he's concerned about a situation where, it's more and more difficult for people who start with only their labor income and no inherited wealth, to accessing wealth and start accumulating wealth. And, ultimately what I care about, is the diffusion of wealth. It's not the fact that we have large quantities of wealth relative to GDP is certainly not bad per se, but we want that everybody has a chance, to access property. Right now, when you have a large mortgage, and sometimes some people have mortgage that can be, even larger than their property value, but you keep paying, the same property tax in most countries or the same council tax in this country than someone without a mortgage and was inherited from his house or was finished reimbursing the house 30 years ago. I think that's wrong. I think if we want to help newcomers to start accumulating wealth, people who start from zero, we need to have a more balanced tax system, taxing labor income less, and taxing large accumulated wealth a bit more, because you have to make choices.
Okay, Thomas Piketty, Ryan Bourne, thank you very much for joining me.